I worked as a construction worker and was assigned to demolish an old hospital. The building had been abandoned for years, and the locals avoided it. They said people had disappeared there, and at night, voices could be heard. I didn't believe it. Such rumors always surrounded abandoned places. The first 2 days were uneventful. We cut metal, tore down walls. Inside the hospital, it was damp and cold despite the heat outside. The walls were covered in mold, shards of glass and plaster crunched underfoot. It felt as if the building didn't want to be touched. But we were just doing our job. On the third day, my partner, Mike, didn't show up. His phone was silent. Strange, because he always warned me if he couldn't make it. I decided to look for him. First, I checked the trailer where we kept our tools, empty. Then, I entered the hospital. The building was massive, with long, dark corridors. My flashlight couldn't fully penetrate the thick darkness. I climbed to the second floor and saw an open door to the operating room. Inside, scattered instruments, dried blood on the floor. I knew this couldn't have been here before. When we first entered, the floor was dirty but free of such stains. I called out for Mike, but silence answered. Then I heard it, a scratching sound against the wall. My heart pounded. Slowly, I turned my head and froze. Crawling along the floor was a figure in a doctor's coat. Its face was hidden behind a surgeon's mask, but the eyes, they were black, void of whites, empty, like deep pits. Fear paralyzed me. The figure slowly rose to its feet, a guttural, distorted sound escaping its throat. It wasn't human speech, but I understood. It knew I was there. Panic took over. I bolted for the door, but heavy footsteps followed behind me. My legs felt numb, my chest tight with terror. As I reached the stairs, something grabbed my arm. I screamed, but it was Mike. Pale, trembling, his eyes wide with fear, he whispered, "We have to go." We ran from the hospital without looking back. Mike could barely speak, but I saw it in his eyes. He had seen something too, something that shouldn't exist. The next day, the site owner called. The building was being demolished without us. He also mentioned that we weren't the first. 3 other workers had seen the doctor. 2 of them were still missing. A week later, I met Mike in a bar. We sat in silence, knowing what had happened. He slid a photograph across the table, an old picture of an operating room, the same room where I saw the entity. But in the photo were doctors, and among them, I recognized him. The same empty black eyes. This was taken in 1952. They shut the place down after patients vanished. They say one of the doctors disappeared with them, Mike whispered. I had no words. The hospital was gone, erased from existence. But in my dreams, I still walked its long corridors, where darkness had a life of its own. I still heard the heavy footsteps following me. And I knew, no matter how far I ran, it was still looking for me. Months later, I moved to another city, but the nightmares continued. I would wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway of my new home. One night, I thought I saw a shadow behind the curtain. Then, looking in the bathroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of a figure in a doctor's coat standing behind me. One evening, Mike called me. His voice was shaking. "It's here," he whispered. "I see it. It's standing outside my window." Then the line went dead. A chill ran down my spine. I knew what I had to do. I packed my things and left the city that night. But it didn't matter. No matter where I went, it found me. Always the same. Heavy footsteps, the same black, empty eyes and reflections. I don't know what it is, but it won't let me forget. 10 years have passed. I changed my name, my cities, my life. But last night, I heard a knock at my door. Slow, steady. I didn't open it. But this morning, there was an old surgeon's mask on my doorstep. I know what it means. It has found me again. I never imagined I would find myself in such a situation. My feet were slipping on the cold asphalt, and my mind was filled with just one thought: catching the train. There was barely any time left, and I gripped my bag tightly, running without looking back. The streets were empty. All the normal people had already found their shelters, but I couldn't afford to stop. In a moment, I could already hear the approaching sound of the train, and I hoped I would make it in time for the last chance. But when I reached the platform, I saw only the train's rear, already gaining speed. leaving behind a dark trail on the tracks. Holding onto my hope, I ran to the doors, and to my surprise, they didn't close. I managed to get inside and into a nearly empty carriage. The carriage was almost deserted, with only a few passengers sitting in their places, blurred by the darkness, as if they were part of the train itself. Strange people, motionless, silent, completely absorbed in their phones, seemingly unaware of the world around them. I glanced at my watch, 11:47 p.m. Outside, it seemed nothing had changed. Only the darkness swallowed everything around. The train moved smoothly. The rhythmic sound of the wheels was soothing, trying to convince me that everything was fine. I found a free seat and sat down, trying to calm myself, but my mind was racing with questions. Why was it so quiet? The silence that prevailed in the carriage was unnatural and incomprehensible. Usually there's always some noise in night trains, voices, even if they're just annoying sounds. But here, nothing. No conversations, no rustling of newspapers, no footsteps on the stairs. Suddenly, I noticed something strange that pulled my thoughts into a spiral of anxiety. The train windows reflected nothing. There were no lights, no streets, no other trains. Just a solid blackness. I tried to look out the window, hoping to see at least some movement, but there was nothing. No light, no street lamps, no passing trains. Just darkness, swallowing everything in its path. My heart started to beat faster. I thought maybe the windows were dirty or closed, but the feeling remained unsettling. Why was it so dark? My hope for a rational explanation began to fade. I tried to relax by looking at the other passengers, trying to distract myself from the strange situation, but everything looked the same. A man in a suit held a newspaper, but the pages weren't turning. He sat completely still. Another woman was holding her purse with both hands. Her gaze was empty, and she didn't take her eyes off the same spot in front of her. I tried to get their attention, but no one responded. This was starting to irritate and scare me at the same time. I got up from my seat, deciding to walk through the carriage and see if there were any other signs of normality, but nothing had changed. The passengers still acted the same. I approached the door that led to the next carriage, hoping to find at least some noise or normal movement, but the door wouldn't budge. I pressed the button several times and even tugged on the handle, but nothing happened. It was locked. Every movement, every gesture of mine seemed pointless. Then, I felt the air grow heavier. The atmosphere around me seemed to change, as if something or someone had begun to fill the carriage. The sensation of being watched grew with each passing second. I heard a faint sound, almost like breathing, like breath coming from behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing. I tried to speak to the man with the newspaper, but he didn't react. I stepped closer and touched his shoulder. His skin was cold, lifeless. I couldn't stop myself from recoiling when he suddenly turned his head, and I saw his eyes. They were black, empty like an abyss. I recoiled, realizing this was not just something strange. It was something much worse. And then the doors at the front of the carriage opened. A figure appeared in the corridor. She was tall, thin, and her face was hidden under a dark hood. She walked toward me, her steps steady and sure. I tried to run to the exit, looking for any possible way to escape, but the doors behind me had locked. I couldn't leave, and this figure kept getting closer. The lights in the carriage began to flicker, and I heard a strange, barely audible whisper that seemed to fill the air. She stopped just a few steps away from me. I felt a chill run through me when I realized her face was mine. It wasn't a normal reflection. It was a dark version of me, twisted and distorted in some other distorted world. I couldn't say a word. The light went out. When I opened my eyes again, the train had stopped. I stepped onto the platform. It was empty, and I didn't recognize the station. There were no signs, only thick fog and old lampposts that barely flickered in the darkness. I turned around, and not recognizing the station, I decided to go back to the train. But it was gone. Only cold wind and the echo of a voice remained. You will never return. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to supernatural stories. No ghosts, no paranormal occurrences. I considered all of it to be fiction or illusions. But what happened to me couldn't be explained. My apartment has always been my favorite place. Small, cozy, with a view of the park. I live alone, so the space felt even bigger and freer. One evening, after a long day at work, I returned home and immediately felt that something had changed. It was a strange feeling, as though someone had been in my home while I was away. I checked all the rooms, finding nothing suspicious. But that feeling wouldn't leave me. Then I noticed something odd. In the hallway, on the wall, there was a shadow. This shadow hadn't been there during the day when I left for work, and it disappeared as soon as I turned on the light. At first, I thought it was just a lighting glitch, but with each passing day, the situation repeated itself. Every evening, the shadow on the wall grew more pronounced, as though something or someone was standing behind me while I sat on the couch. I thought I was just tired and couldn't think of any other explanation. One evening, when I got home, I saw it. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar, although I always made sure to close it before I left. I felt an urge to be cautious and decided to check. I quietly opened the door, but saw no one. Just deep darkness. My hand reached for the light switch, but before I could press it, I heard a faint rustle behind me. I turned sharply, but there was no one in the hallway. Just that strange sound. It felt as though someone was quietly watching me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the door to my bedroom and the same shadow on the wall. It began to move, changing shape, as if something was inside the room with me. My heart raced, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. I was afraid that if I looked away, I'd see something far worse. A few days later, I began to suspect that someone might have broken into my apartment, but I found no signs of a break-in. I called the police, and they checked all the locks, but found nothing suspicious. Everything was in its place. Maybe I was just losing my mind, but when I tried to sleep again that night, the shadow on the wall changed shape once more. And this time I saw something. It wasn't a clear form, but I could feel it getting closer to me. It was so realistic that I couldn't believe my eyes. I no longer wanted to stay in the apartment. I packed my things and went to stay with some friends, but even there I felt the same thing, something I couldn't explain. With each passing day, that feeling grew stronger. Now I'm living in a rental apartment. I've been here for a few weeks, and everything seems calm. But every time I walk down the hallway, I feel something that watches me from the darkness. And I know that sooner or later, the shadow will return.